This is an exclusive presentation from Federated Media. Unholstered.
Here we go. It's time for another edition of Unholstered. Hopefully you all are having a fantastic weekend. My name is Kayla Blakesley. I'm just one of your hosts here on Unholstered. During the week, I host a local news talk radio program, and on the weekends, I represent the local media side here on Unholstered.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Rosales-Scatina, and I am a captain with the Fort Wayne Police Department, and welcome back to the show.
Sophia obviously represents the local law enforcement side of this program. If you've missed any previous episodes of Unholstered, you can actually download the podcast anywhere you download a podcast. Just search for Unholstered. Sophia, last weekend we started off the show with me congratulating you on a recent award that you received, and then you walk in here and say you just received another one. Where was I?
Not at the awards ceremony.
No, I guess not. I didn't even
you were
know.
at another event, or at least heard about it. So this was the Latinos Count. I was named Amiga of the Year for 2023. So yeah,
that's like a really big deal. Congratulations!
Was huge, and it was very unexpected, and I'm very humbled and grateful to receive that award.
Well, truly, Sophia, congratulations from me to you. I know we could spend all day talking about your accolades, but we've got a really important topic to get to. I know it's one you are particularly passionate about, and I think a lot of people are these days. It's just the topic of mental health. So who did you bring in for us today?
This morning, I brought in Dr. Darren Higgibotham. He joined our department a few years ago when we really took a turn towards mental wellness for our officers, and I'll let him introduce himself now.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Higgibotham. I'm Darren. Please use that.
Okay.
You're not going to remember Higginbotham.
Thank you, Doc. I really appreciate that because I don't know that I feel like I would butcher your last name, and I don't want to do that. I'm curious, Sophia, when you said your mental health program within the Fort Wayne Police Department kind of took a turn, what does that mean?
Well, we actually started one.
Okay, that's great.
So, as you know, on this, I've talked about this show that I've been a big proponent of mental health almost my entire career. And I know what I've needed throughout the years. And we finally got a group together, and the chief had signed off on actually creating a mental wellness program, a peer support program for our department, for all of our officers. And through that, we received some grants through the government, on COPS grants, I believe, wellness grants, something like that. And we're able to find Dr. Higgibotham, who does not reside in Fort Wayne, but he does come up and he holds sessions for our officers. So when this first started a few years ago, we only had a handful of officers that actually showed up, and now he's here for a full week. 1 week or two?
1 week every quarter.
Yeah, and the sessions are almost completely booked.
Oh,
now.
wow.
So officers are really leaning into this, and I'm happy about that because it's a much-needed program to just help sustain our emotional health.
How long have you had the program?
We started in 2018.
Where do you reside then? Where do you live?
Indianapolis.
Oh, you're from. Okay, so you're in Indianapolis. Do you have your own practice in Indy?
I do. We have a private practice there.
When you got this call, or did you see this job post? I mean, how did this connection with the Fort Wayne Police Department even come to fruition?
I believe it came from the fact that our practice works with hundreds of police departments and thousands of officers, and one of the big ones is the Indiana State Police. And I think when agencies are looking to start their programs, they contact the big boys and they find out what those guys are doing. And I believe the connection came that way, that the state police referred Fort Wayne to me.
Where does your, desire or passion to help law enforcement come from?
I think that this is a population that you see some of the most noble people in the world. I mean,
I could not agree more. Yeah.
I mean, there's no way that I would sign up to take a job to do what these people do. Yeah. So they intrigue me. I'm curious about them. You know what I mean? And I think that, where my degree could be used with a lot of different populations, this is one that's been the most rewarding to work with. I mean, in grad school, I worked with children, I worked with couples, I worked with families. And I really didn't like it all that much. And I was asked, I got to be honest about that. And my supervisor recognized that, and he gave me an opportunity. This was in southern Missouri, where I grew up, to go to a sheriff's department and start working there. And I absolutely loved it. So the rest is history, kind of.
No, I can totally relate to that. I mean, that's kind of how this podcast started. I mean, for me, I'm with you. I always say that the people who volunteer to serve and protect our communities, to step forward to do that, are some of the bravest men and women we have in our country as well. So I couldn't agree with you more. And that's kind of how this podcast even started, because I got tired of the rhetoric about our local police officers. So I get that. I'm with you. They are some of the noblest people that we have walking on earth. So it's good to do right by them, or try to do right by them. What is your degree in, Darren?
It's in clinical psychology.
And what brought you to that degree? What made you walk down that road?
Boy, how much time do you have?
I got, at this point, about 20 minutes.
We get to analyze you today, Doc.
It's funny. I was getting a degree in business my at the University of Missouri, and my dad had been a longtime, very successful person in business as well. So I was just kind of following the family way. But I noticed that when I was not in school and I was doing jobs, the business part of the degree that I was getting exposed to, marketing, economics, and all that kind of stuff, was not nearly as interesting to me as like how people got along at work, because I'd see people come into work with problems, and I'd see people fighting with each other at work, and that part of work was much more interesting to me. So I thought, well, how do I get a degree that would allow me to address things in the workplace that are people issues? And the next thing you know, I called my dad and I said, hey, I think I'm going to change my degree to psychology. And he said, why the hell would you do that?
I can see that being kind of a startling conversation.
So I don't think that he was very excited about that. But as time went by and he saw that I could make a good living at it and that I was good at it, it eventually received his blessing, you know.
Right, he's got to obviously be pretty proud of you now. So fast forward 2018, you come on board with the Fort Wayne Police Department. And what is it you said? You come up here for a week every quarter? Mm-hmm. To meet with members of law enforcement. And Sophia, is that strictly like, hey, I want to sign up for a session? This isn't mandated. This is specifically volunteer?
It is not mandated. No, we don't do that. Although we can highly suggest that some people attend, and we'll sometimes, if we really see a need, we will mark them on duty to attend. And some people do come on duty. Some people come off duty. He does a bit for retirees as well, because we know, through mental health, one of the greatest challenges is when an officer retires after giving so long of your life. Now you feel kind of empty and unuseful, and it can create some real problems. And we've had some suicides in the past from retired officers, and so we really took a look at that and decided, well, we need to focus there as well. So all of our wellness programs does extend into our retirees as well.
That is really cool. I didn't even think about the retired police officers to that degree, to that level, but it unfortunately kind of makes sense. Yeah. So when you say these visits then, so Doc, are they with you? Are these like closed door, one-on-one visits? Folks sign up for a time, I'm assuming? Mm-hmm. And I know you can't obviously reveal much about individual sessions, obviously, but what is it that you find maybe seems to be a commonality among all of the officers?
I think the primary things are, and I will say that it is different in every community that I go to.
Really?
So, for instance, in Indianapolis, when we do sessions there with people, there are a lot of different issues voiced by officers than what I hear here. So, for instance, we had horrible riots in 2020 in Indianapolis, and so even here today, 3 years later, removed from the riots, we still talk to Indianapolis officers that feel betrayed. There's certainly a moral injury that, I signed up to protect my community and they're burning down buildings in the community. Here, I don't hear those kinds of issues. Mm-hmm. Thank God for you guys. I tend to hear more of issues that are going on outside of work. Marriages, kids, in-laws, you name it, just those type of issues. The things that might come up that are work-related tend to be, I went to a critical incident. I was at an incident where somebody died, and I feel like I need to talk to somebody about that, because within the department, it's usually the mantra of suck it up, or keep your mouth shut and don't talk to anybody because we've got an investigation going on and we don't want to compromise the investigation. But we would argue from the mental health side, it's actually very important that people, at least in a confidential environment, be able to talk through what they've experienced. And that they're not keeping it inside where, unfortunately, this is a population that will cope very negatively, whether it's, alcohol or you name it. So the buy-in that Sophia talked about has been really good here. The first year I came up here, it was a long week because I was scheduled to be here a week.
Yeah.
And there might have been 8 9 people that signed up to come.
Wow.
And now it's routinely 30, 40 people.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so it's really grown. And, officers talk to each other. They're not trusting of outsiders in general. Mm-hmm. So once they talk to each other and found out, hey, this guy's
not too bad.
He's not too bad. He's a pro-cop psychologist. He supports what we do. I think word traveled.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, at least for what I hear from officers too, that he's an outsider. So that actually becomes important because no one feels he's running and telling anyone in the administration what's going on with each individual officer. Sometimes you could have that if they're on the inside, like if they're somewhere related to the department, but he's completely just outside of the department, which really helps, I think, in officers buying into actually going to these sessions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So obviously there's been a lot of growth since 2018 when
Yes.
this program started.
Thankfully.
What do you hear then, obviously, on the inside, Sophia? Are you hearing people just like, oh, I'm so glad he's on our team, our staff, or however that works? I mean, what do you hear?
I hear nothing but good things. Good things about the program in general and good things about him. Just having someone to kind of offload on. And yes, I do go myself to these sessions. Just had mine at 8:00
This morning?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
So it's one of those things where I'm happy that he's here and doing this. And I would have never in a million years thought that there'd be so many officers buying into it in such a short period of time. Because you may think it's a long period of time between 2018 and not, but in cop time, this is like really, really fast. Things have happened really, really fast, and this has grown exponentially. And I think probably moving forward, we might actually have to add a few more days onto this.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. With all of this growth and positive feedback, I mean, I think that's quite the jump. 8 officers from potentially 30, give or take. I mean, do you see growth in the future?
I do see growth. However, we are at the end of the grant cycle, so from what all grants is, we have to then absorb that into our budgeting. So we do have to budget for this on our line items, and I would hope that City Council would see the enormous benefit to an emotionally well officer, that they wouldn't cut anything in surrounding wellness for officers as part of the budget. Let's make sure that we have that always in the budget because it's so important.
I might add a comment there that the growth too may be necessitated by legislation, because there are now, Indiana's not one of them, but there are several states that have mandated legislatively that every law enforcement officer in those particular states will meet with a licensed mental health provider on an annual basis.
Oh, wow.
So you look at what Fort Wayne is doing, it's not mandated here, but they're starting to have people come and talk to a psychologist. So you could kind of argue they're getting ahead of the curve here before it eventually happens legislatively. And it's good news, too, because the traditional model was that applicants that wanted to be police officers would meet with a mental health provider. And if they're deemed suitable and get the job, then they're exposed to all the things that they see in a career. And never again would most officers ever meet with a mental health person. That model doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it makes no sense.
So this idea of periodically checking in with somebody, I think it's the analogy I use is like seeing your primary care doctor. And if the doctor sees something at a low level where they can address it before it metastasizes and becomes something huge, why wouldn't we do that? And so I think the grant writing from the internal side of Fort Wayne can help it grow, but there may be some external forces like legislation that force it to grow.
That's interesting. I'll definitely keep my eyes open for that. I mean, I know you said Indiana's not one of those states, but I mean, Sophia, we should be, and we know a lot of our representatives. I'd be curious, do you know if it's on any of their radars?
No, I do not. I don't think so, but it can be.
Let's put it on their radar, shall we?
Calls. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I hate to bring COVID up, but I'm going to, because I'm just genuinely curious. You've been with the Fort Wayne Police Department since 2018, doing these, quarterly check-ins, and even in Indianapolis. I mean, did COVID, have an impact in what you are hearing from our officers between 2018 and the kind of where things were, coming out of 2020, 21, even in 2022?
I think at the time that COVID first came out, big changes, because some agencies were very much directing their officers not to pull people over or even have contact with people.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah.
that lent itself to officers doing an 8-hour shift where they weren't doing a whole lot in terms of proactive policing. And so I think those guys would say that as COVID has kind of become we know more about it and how it's transmitted and those kinds of things, that they find themselves having to deal with different commands from up on high, like, now you want us to engage with the public, but for a while you didn't. Give us a consistent message.
Yeah, really conflicting.
Yes. But, the other thing, too, is that COVID has affected officers. We forget lots of times that these are human beings. Mm-hmm. So you get officers that have died of COVID. You get officers who've had family members die of COVID. They're responding to citizens that have COVID and their family members. So it's been far-reaching.
I think that's what I actually love about this conversation is that our officers are humans too. A great example of this is you, Sophia. You just walked in here and I see you've got some bandages on your right arm. And I was like, what happened to you? Oh my goodness. Which you had a surgery. Everything is all fine and dandy. Yeah. But I have this unfair expectation that y'all aren't human. Like nothing's allowed to happen to you, Sophia. You're my superhero, So kind of to that point with COVID, it's just kind of the sad reality that we don't think COVID's impacting our officers. We don't think COVID's impacting our firefighters or our first responders. Yeah. You're the ones there to fix everything, not be having problems either.
Yeah, none of us got shut down, so we worked through the entire thing. None of us had a day off. Probably worked some of us worked even longer hours. Think about your EMS workers, your firefighters making those scenes of COVID patients. Officers, just the unknown.
Yeah.
Right? Because we didn't know a lot when it first came out, but yet we were tasked with still providing our services as needed. And, that unknown is what really affects everybody's psyche, I think, when we're talking about things like this. Even going into a building where you just don't know if someone's in there or they intend to do me harm, all that stuff plays on your mind all the time. And when you're constantly on guard 24/7 because you have to be, it really becomes emotionally taxing. And so I'm really happy that we have programs like this that provide us an outlet to let things go and to have someone who doesn't really know us. Because I can talk to my friends all day long, and sometimes they take my side when they shouldn't, and I don't get that impartiality like I would with Dr. Higgibotham. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point.
So I'm just really glad that I have this third party intermediary that just kind of can tell me what I should hear and not what I want to hear.
Okay, and then be honest, all right? Which you always are.
I always am, yeah.
Is there at all, and we can kind of get into this, there's always this stigma around mental health before we really dive into that. But is there anything like that? Like, oh, Sophia, you signed up with a session with Darren. Oh. Is there any kind of that vibe?
I don't know, at least not to my face, but we just had this conversation over here because he can see the schedule, but we schedule through some officers on the department. But if you don't want to schedule with them because you don't want them to know you're going, you can schedule directly with Dr. Higgibotham. So you can do it both ways.
So you can keep it pretty discreet.
I prefer that people see my name on there because I want them to know, well, Sophia goes. Mm-hmm. If a captain goes, then I guess, it's okay. I don't know that that's how they view it, but that's how I'm thinking they view it. So I'm out there. And, I'm freely about wellness.
Oh, yes.
I have no issue. To me, this is just like going to the doctor to have a surgery. You can go to the doctor to talk about some stuff and figure out those puzzles in your head that haven't yet been put together. So,
why, Doc, in your opinion? Because I don't know if officers talk to you ever about this. This actual stigma around not even just mental health. I think particularly when it comes to law enforcement, I think that's even a bigger stigma, unfortunately. Because like you said, there's this mentality almost of suck it up, buttercup, keep it on the inside. Don't say anything. We've got an investigation. Anyway, there really is kind of, as much as it's a stigma, there's also a little bit of truth to that to some degree. But why?
Well, I think you could say the stigma exists in all areas of our society with mental health, not just with police officers. But, I think as a kid, I never saw a commercial on TV for an antidepressant medicine. And now you see them all the time. Mm-hmm. So I think the tide is turning a little bit there, but you're talking about a profession that's largely male, and we suck at talking about our emotions. We're just not good with that.
Here.
And so I think professions like military and first responders, you hear that alpha male, tough exterior even more so. But I think the thing that this field is coming to terms with, unfortunately, is the research that shows that over the last, say, 6-7 years, the primary reason that police officers die is not because they're getting shot by bad guys. It's not because they're in vehicle accidents where they wreck their car. It's because they're killing themselves.
Wow.
So even in the recruit academy, when new officers are coming in, there's much more that's being given to them about, we're going to train you on how to use a gun and how to drive fast and how to tase people and know constitutional law. But we're also going to arm you with your brain and your emotions, because that's just as important as all the physical aspects of policing. So in agencies where you hear the top person, whether it's a sheriff or a police chief, espousing the need for mental health, you start to see that stigma decline a bit. And, there's this saying that the morale of an organization is set at the top. If the chief and the sheriff don't support it, then you're going to see agencies where mental health remains a stigma. But if they support it, I'll just give you a
like
quick,
Sophia putting her name out there. Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example. 2 weeks ago, I was at a sheriff's department south of here, and the entire department, in their case, they were mandated to come, but every single person in that department, including the sheriff, came and had an individual session with me, and that certainly communicates that this is what we're going to be about.
This is important.
The stigma is over. Lean into this. It's a part of who we are going to be. And so it's a slowly turning tide, but I think the stigma is slowly turning in the right direction.
What would you say to an officer listening right now? I mean, I suppose even a non-officer, because you said it, it's kind of have this stigma in any form of career or really in any capacity. But what would you say to that, that kind of, you're talking about macho man, masculine, I don't need this. What would you say to that person?
I would say that in my experience, having worked with first responders for 23 years, that style works for a little while.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think of the worst case scenarios I see are things like the guy that's the alpha that holds it all together eventually is revealing to others that he's got a drinking problem and that his marriage is falling apart and that he's blowing money at a casino to cope with things. And so I think just I've long argued the guy with the biggest balls, pardon my expression, is the guy that walks in and says, you know what, I can't handle this on my own.
Wow.
I need to talk to somebody. And whether it's military veterans or police officers, I really believe that because there is such a stigma and there's pride and lots of other things, that for somebody to come in my office really speaks to a real man, in my opinion.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way either. I'll tell you what, though, kind of on that note, just a couple of years back, and it was just pre-COVID, because that's how we label things, these days. We also brought on, as part of our healthcare benefits package, is 3 now free sessions with a psychologist, simply because in the news world, it's one of those things too. No one really tells you this when you go to school or decide, hey, I want to work in the media. They don't tell you that you're constantly going to be talking about babies who OD'd from fentanyl at their daycare facility, and that you're going to be reading press releases upon press releases, police reports, about dead bodies being pulled from the mommy, and so on and so forth. No one ever tells you that part of how incredibly depressing I feel like sometimes this job can be, not to mention the whole politics part of it, because then there's that in it too. But so just a couple of years back, I actually thought it was a really great moment for my company. It's not mandated. We don't have to go see this particular psychologist, but we have 3 free sessions every year that reset if we feel like throughout the year. We also just kind of want to check in, touch base, and see how we're doing, which I kind of, to your point, a lot of jobs can be really stressful in different capacities. Obviously, I think first responders. Sophia, you got a little bit more of a stressful job than I do. I'm with Darren. I don't want your job. I'd never sign up for your job. But it's to your point, the tide does kind of seem to be turning a little bit. And
as a matter of fact, it's kind of unusual these days to have jobs in any sector that doesn't offer employee assistance counseling to their employees, because I think employers at large realize if my person is sane and stable, they're a better employee.
True. They're going to do better work. Yeah.
But your point about the even if you're not out there in the trenches like Sophia and her group is, there is such a thing as what's called vicarious trauma. And in our world in mental health, we talk about people that, for instance, you have people that have to work in digital forensics. That's a position in police where they're looking through people's phones and looking through people's computers and iPads, trying to uncover evidence of crimes. They're not out in the situation themselves, but just witnessing it and being around it can have a very significant impact on people. So I think that's great that your employer is recognizing, hey, the news isn't always unicorns and rainbows.
Not at all, unfortunately.
What are we giving to our staff that has to be on the periphery of that?
Well, I think it was just to your point, that the tide is turning a little bit. And obviously, Sophia, it sounds like it's turning amongst your officers as well. When going from 8 to 30, I think that's a pretty staggering stat over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm super happy about that. Because, we always talk about, going home safe and going home with as many holes in your body as you came to work with. But we never talk about going home with emotionally healthy like you came in, if you came in emotionally healthy to begin with. But going home in that same manner, because we see so much during the course of just one shift that it's just one of those things that we take for granted, that we just go home and we'll deal with it, but we're not dealing with it well, and the stats prove it. Suicide is the number one killer of police. Alcoholism, gambling, marital issues, those are all part of those problems too. So I'm glad we're looking forward and addressing those in a positive way.
Sophia, if anyone with the Fort Wayne Police Department is listening right now and they want a session, do they go to you? Do they go to Darren? How do they do that, let's say next time around? Or how do they know within your department he's coming? What does that look like?
The email comes out. You can sign up through that email, or his Dr. Higginbotham's number is on there. You can always call him.
So if they want to book
a direct book, that way nobody else knows.
Gotcha. Doc, thanks for coming up. I know you're here for your session, so I appreciate you making a time for our session here on Unholstered. And if you've missed any previous sessions of Unholstered, you can download the podcast anywhere you download a podcast. Just search for Unholstered. Your town, your team, your topics. This is Unholstered.
Thanks for listening to Unholstered. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Unholstered.
Podcasts by Federated Media.